The courtroom froze. A silence so thick, you could hear the blood in your veins. He thought his money bought him everything. He was about to learn it bought him nothing but humiliation. The air in the courtroom that day wasn't just heavy, it was practically solid, thick with the kind of tension that makes your teeth ache. Every single person in that gallery, from the hardened bailiff to the wide-eyed interns, could feel it. They knew. They all knew. Something monumental, something explosive, was about to unravel right before their very eyes. And at the heart of it, a conflict as old as time itself. Raw, unchecked power against quiet, desperate resilience. On one side, lounging back in a seat as if it were a private jet, sat Brandon "Brandy" Thorne III. His name alone resonated with the kind of old money that built empires and bypassed consequences. Thorne Industries. You've seen the logos, the skyscrapers, the philanthropic donations plastered across glossy magazines. And Brandy? He was the golden boy, the heir apparent, his impeccably tailored suit and designer watch screaming, "I don't belong here, and I certainly don't care." A smirk, barely perceptible but sharp as a razor, played on his lips. It was the kind of smirk that told you he wasn't just confident, he was utterly convinced of his untouchable status. He looked at the room, at the cameras, at Judge Judy, with an almost bored disdain. He thought this was a formality, a tedious inconvenience before he could return to his lavish life. He truly believed his last name was a shield, his bank account a weapon, and this courtroom, merely another stage for him to assert his dominance. Across from him, huddled slightly, her shoulders a little too tense, was Sarah Jensen. Her hands, calloused and paint-stained, clasped tightly in her lap. Sarah was everything Brandy Thorne III was not. She was grit, she was passion, she was the quiet, burning flame of creativity. Her art wasn't just a hobby. It was her lifeblood, her meager income, her identity. She ran a small, struggling atelier, meticulously restoring antique instruments and crafting bespoke pieces, each one a testament to weeks, sometimes months, of painstaking labor. Her clothes were simple, practical, a stark contrast to the designer threads across the aisle. Her eyes, however, held a fierce, unwavering light, a spark that even the crushing weight of Thorne Industries couldn't extinguish. She wasn't here for revenge, not purely. She was here for justice, for recognition, for the validation of her stolen craft. She was visibly nervous, yet something in her posture suggested she had reached her breaking point, and sometimes that's where true power lies. The judge, Judy Scheinle herself, was a statue carved from granite. Her gaze swept over both parties, then over the hushed gallery. It wasn't an angry gaze, not yet. It was something far more chilling. Pure, unadulterated assessment. A predator sizing up its prey, not with malice, but with an almost scientific detachment. Her eyes paused on Brandy for a beat longer than necessary, a silent recognition passing between them, though Brandy seemed too absorbed in his own self-importance to notice. This was a man who had never faced a genuine challenge, never known true accountability. And Judge Judy, the undisputed queen of this particular jungle, was about to deliver a masterclass in it. The air crackled with anticipation. Everyone held their breath. Disaster, they knew, was not just coming. It was already here, a coiled viper ready to strike. And Brandy Thorne, in his blissful ignorance, had no idea the fangs were already closing in. His biggest mistake? Thinking this was just another day, another trivial lawsuit. This was not a lawsuit. This was an ambush. The court clerk's voice, usually a dull drone, seemed to echo with unnatural clarity. Case number 23-774, Sarah Jensen versus Brandon Thorne III. The words hung in the air, a formal beginning to an inevitably informal and utterly devastating confrontation. Brandy's lawyer, a slick, impeccably groomed man named Arthur Hayes, adjusted his tie. He had the confident, slightly condescending air of someone who usually dealt with corporate mergers, not petty claims court. He leaned over and whispered something to Brandy, who chuckled a low, dismissive sound that seemed to grate on the nerves of everyone who heard it. Sarah flinched almost imperceptibly, a small, involuntary reaction to the casual cruelty emanating from the defendant's side. Judge Judy's voice cut through the burgeoning murmurs like a scalpel. It wasn't loud, but it possessed an authority that commanded absolute silence. "All right, Mr. Hayes, let's get to it. What exactly is your client's defense against the alleged destruction of property, specifically a custom-built, antique-grade musical instrument, valued at over $50,000? Hayes cleared his throat, a sound of practiced confidence. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge that an incident occurred involving an item in Ms. Jensen's possession, the valuation presented is, frankly, preposterous. Furthermore, we contend that any damage was purely accidental, a minor mishap. And my client has already extended a generous offer of compensation, which was, inexplicably, refused." He spoke with a practiced ease, as if reciting from a script, barely glancing at Sarah. His tone implied that Sarah was being unreasonable, ungrateful, perhaps even opportunistic. This was the classic maneuver: diminish the victim, minimize the damage, present the villain as benevolent. Brandy Thorne III nodded along, a self-satisfied smirk cementing itself on his face. He leaned forward slightly, as if expecting the judge to immediately accept this sanitized version of events. His eyes flickered to Sarah, a fleeting look of contempt, daring her to challenge him. The gallery, however, began to stir. Whispers, like agitated bees, started to hum. $50,000 was not preposterous to the average person. It was life-changing, and inexplicably refused. That phrase alone was a red flag, implying a story far darker than a simple mishap. Judge Judy didn't react immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on Hayes, unwavering, almost clinical. The silence that followed his statement stretched, becoming oppressive. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a loaded one, filled with unspoken judgment. Hayes, for the first time, seemed to falter, his practiced smile tightening at the edges. He probably expected a quick retort and negotiation. He got only the silent, piercing scrutiny of a woman who had seen every trick in the book, and then some. This was the Judge Judy signature, the calm before the storm, the quiet assessment that made even the most seasoned lawyer sweat. Then her voice, still quiet, dropped a few degrees colder. "Mr. Hayes, you used the term incident. You refer to it as a minor mishap. Are you suggesting that a custom-crafted, antique-grade lute, a family heirloom in the process of being restored for a client, being smashed to splinters is a minor mishap?" The emphasis on smashed to splinters was deliberate, visceral, stripping away the lawyer's sterile corporate language. Hayes visibly swallowed. "Your Honor, my client was perhaps in a state of elevated spirits. It was an unfortunate accident, a momentary lapse in judgment. He deeply regrets any distress caused." He tried to pivot, to introduce the alcohol defense, the boys will be boys narrative. Brandy Thorne, emboldened by his lawyer's smooth delivery, chimed in, leaning closer to the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look, Your Honor, I told her I'd buy her a new one. Whatever it was. I even offered her triple what she paid for it. What's the big deal? It's just wood and strings, right? She's clearly trying to extort me." His tone was casual, arrogant, as if discussing a broken toy, not a lifetime of artistry. He looked directly at Sarah, a defiant sneer twisting his features, completely oblivious to the fury he was igniting in the room. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Just wood and strings? The sheer, unadulterated disrespect was breathtaking. People shifted uncomfortably, some shaking their heads in disgust. Even Hayes seemed to wince slightly at his client's outburst. Brandy Thorne had just pulled back the curtain, revealing the entitled monster beneath the expensive facade. This was precisely the kind of villain Judge Judy specialized in tearing apart. The camera operators, sensing the shift, zoomed in slightly, capturing every nuance of the growing tension. Judge Judy, however, remained impassive. Her eyes, still on Brandy, narrowed fractionally. The courtroom went silent again, a heavier, More dangerous silence this time. This wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of quiet before a cat pounces or a thunderclap explodes. She let Brandy's words hang in the air, allowing their full weight of arrogance and callousness to settle on everyone present. The psychological effect was immediate. Brandy, for the first time, looked slightly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, his smirk faltering. He seemed to realize, perhaps too late, that he had overstepped, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Judy finally began, her voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Let me tell you something about just wood and strings." To Miss Jensen, that wood and strings was a masterpiece in the making. It was hours of skilled labor, years of trained craftsmanship. A piece of history entrusted to her care. To you, it might be trivial. To her, it was a piece of her soul. Do you understand the difference between value and price? Her words weren't a question. They were a laser-guided missile, aimed straight at the core of his entitlement. Brandy, still trying to project an aura of unconcern, scoffed. "Your Honor, I offered to replace it. What more does she want? A blank check?" She's clearly exaggerating the sentimental value to inflate her claim. He crossed his arms, leaning back again, attempting to regain his perceived dominance. He still couldn't grasp it. He thought money was the universal solvent, that every problem had a price tag. He couldn't fathom a world where something held worth beyond currency. Exaggerating sentimental value? Judge Judy's voice rose by a mere decibel, but the impact was seismic. "Ms. Jensen, you may proceed with your testimony. Tell me, in your own words, what happened to this wood and strings." Her gaze moved from Brandy to Sarah, a look of profound, challenging empathy. It was an unspoken invitation for Sarah to speak her truth, to reclaim her narrative from the dismissive scorn of Brandon Thorne III. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands still trembling slightly, but her eyes now held a renewed resolve. The judge's words had given her strength. "Your Honor," she began, her voice soft but clear, "I had been commissioned by Dr. Alastair Finch, a renowned musicologist, to restore a 17th-century lute. It was an incredibly rare instrument, passed down through generations of his family. I had spent 6 months, almost every waking hour, on its delicate restoration. It was nearing completion, just a few more days, and it would have been perfect." Her voice cracked slightly with emotion as she described the painstaking work, the historical significance. She continued, recounting the day of the incident. "Mr. Thorne came into my studio unannounced. He had seen some of my other contemporary pieces online and demanded I drop everything to make him a custom guitar for a party he was hosting that weekend. I explained I had existing commitments, especially Dr. Finch's lute, and that custom work takes time, weeks, months, even not days." He became agitated. Sarah paused, a flicker of fear crossing her face as she remembered the encounter. The gallery leaned forward, captivated. This wasn't just about a broken instrument anymore. It was about the collision of two utterly different worlds. "He started yelling," Sarah went on, her voice gaining a quiet power, "saying I didn't know who he was, that Thorne Industries owned half the city, and I would regret refusing him. He called my studio a hovel and my work trinkets. And then he saw the lute sitting on my workbench, polished and almost complete. He said, 'If you won't work for me, then you won't work at all.'" Her voice dropped to a whisper, filled with remembered horror. "He grabbed it. He just grabbed the neck of it with both hands. I tried to stop him, but he was so much bigger, so much stronger. And he snapped it over his knee, like it was nothing, like it was a twig." The words hung heavy in the air, punctuated by the sharp intake of breath from dozens of people. Snapped it over his knee. The image was brutal, stark, undeniable. This wasn't an accident, a mishap. This was an act of deliberate, malicious destruction. Audience members gasped audibly. A woman in the back row openly covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Whispers erupted, louder this time, a furious buzz that spoke of collective outrage. Even Brandy's lawyer, Arthur Hayes, looked down, visibly discomfited. He had likely not been privy to this specific detail of his client's elevated spirits. Brandy Thorne III, however, just sat there, a defiant glare fixed on Sarah. He clearly still didn't grasp the gravity of his actions, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He probably thought Sarah was just being dramatic, embellishing for the cameras. His arrogance remained a stubborn, toxic shield. Judge Judy's gaze was now fixed solely on Brandy. All pretense of calm had vanished, replaced by a glacial fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting. The silence that descended was absolute, chilling, a vacuum where the air itself seemed to thin. No one dared to move or even breathe too loudly. This was the moment. This was where Judge Judy would unleash her precision strike, not with theatrics, but with the cold, hard hammer of truth. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice cutting through the silence like a diamond on glass. "Is that an accurate depiction of events? Did you, in a fit of pique because an artist would not immediately drop her existing commissions to cater to your whim, intentionally destroy a priceless antique?" The word intentionally was delivered with lethal accuracy. Brandy shifted, uncomfortable, but still defiant. "Your Honor, I was frustrated." She was being difficult. "And I admit I had a few drinks, but I didn't mean to break it that badly. I just lost my temper. It was an accident in the heat of the moment." He tried to backtrack, to mitigate, to present himself as a victim of circumstance, of his own fleeting emotions. His eyes darted nervously, no longer holding Sarah's gaze. The bravado was starting to crack. "Lost your temper?" Judge Judy scoffed, a single, sharp sound of pure contempt. "Mr. Thorne, you are a grown man. You are the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. You claim to be educated. And you think a few drinks and a lost temper excuses the willful destruction of someone's livelihood, someone's passion, someone's historical trust? Did you consider the person whose family heirloom you reduced to kindling? Did you consider Ms. Jensen, who invested 6 months of her skilled life into that piece?" Her questions were relentless, each one a hammer blow to his carefully constructed facade. Brandy spluttered. I told her I'd replace it. I offered her $10,000. That's more than enough for a broken violin or whatever it was." His voice was rising now, losing its carefully cultivated coolness, revealing the petulant child beneath. He was truly confused. Why wouldn't money just make this go away? Another round of gasps rippled through the gallery. $10,000? For a $50,000 antique loot, intentionally destroyed? The insult was almost greater than the initial act. Sarah, for her part, simply stared at him, a quiet sadness replacing her initial fear. She knew he would never truly understand. $10,000? Judge Judy repeated, her voice laced with incredulity and scorn. "Let me be clear, Mr. Thorne. You didn't offer her compensation. You threw a pittance at her, expecting her to be grateful, to be quiet, and to disappear. You tried to buy her silence, not rectify your egregious actions. And you thought that because you carry the Thorne name, because you have inherited unimaginable wealth, that you are above the law, above decency, above basic human respect." Her voice was gaining power, each word a direct challenge to his core belief system. Brandy bristled. "My family name has nothing to do with this. I'm an individual, and frankly, Your Honor, my family's lawyers deal with far bigger issues than some broken fiddle." He waved his hand dismissively, trying to diminish the entire proceedings, to put it back in its trivial box. His contempt was palpable, not just for Sarah, but for the court itself. This was his biggest mistake. This was the moment he openly challenged Judge Judy's authority, not just as a judge, but as an arbiter of justice. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. The air changed instantly. Even the bailiff, a man who had seen decades of court drama, shifted his weight, sensing the imminent shift from a skirmish to an all-out war. Nobody moved. The silence felt dangerous, electric. Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Brandy Thorne III with an intensity that seemed to strip him bare. Her voice, though still not a shout, was now a dangerous growl. "Mr. Thorne, let me educate you. This courtroom does not belong to your father. This courtroom does not belong to Thorne Industries. This courtroom does not care about your bigger issues. This courtroom belongs to justice. And in this courtroom, your family name is nothing but a label. And your money, nothing but paper. What matters here is the truth, and your egregious disregard for it." Brandy flinched, his composure finally starting to visibly crumble. His face, usually a mask of smug assurance, now showed a flicker of genuine fear, or at least, startled indignation. He had never been spoken to like this. He had never been stripped of his inherent privilege so brutally, so publicly. "And as for your generous offer," Judge Judy continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "Ms. Jensen, what exactly was the full value of the instrument, including your 6 months of labor and the historical significance?" Sarah, emboldened by the judge's unwavering support, found her voice. "Your Honor, the base value of the antique loot, prior to restoration, was appraised at $30,000. My restoration work, calculated at my professional rate, adds another $25,000. Plus the emotional distress, the loss of reputation for a delayed commission, and the material cost of specialized antique components that are incredibly difficult to source," she trailed off, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the loss. "The total claim, Your Honor, is for $72,000. $72,000. The new figure hit the gallery like a physical blow. The discrepancy between Brandy's $10,000 and Sarah's $72,000 was a chasm, a clear indicator of his deliberate undervaluation and disrespect. The murmurs erupted again, louder, more agitated. People were exchanging furious glances. This was not just about money. It was about principle, about the rich trampling on the working class with casual impunity. Brandy Thorne III's jaw dropped. $72,000. That's insane. That's more than my monthly allowance. His outrage was genuine, not at his actions, but at the sheer nerve of someone asking for what he considered an exorbitant sum. He looked at his lawyer, eyes wide with disbelief, as if Hayes was supposed to make this outrageous claim disappear with a wave of his hand. His sense of entitlement was so deeply ingrained, it bordered on delusion. "Your monthly allowance is irrelevant to this court, Mr. Thorne," Judge Judy retorted, her voice ice-cold. "What is relevant is the actual damage done and the value of a person's skilled labor. Ms. Jensen, do you have any other evidence to support your claim, beyond your testimony?" Sarah nodded, taking another deep breath. "Yes, Your Honor. I brought the official appraisal document for the loot pre-restoration from the International Society of Loot Makers. And I also have this." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, discreet USB drive. "It's a security camera recording from my studio. I have a small system in place for insurance purposes. It captured the entire incident." A sudden, collective hush fell over the courtroom, even more profound than before. A video? The entire incident? Every single head in the gallery snapped towards Brandy Thorne III, whose face had gone from indignant anger to a ghastly shade of pale. His eyes, for the first time, held genuine panic. He had been so sure no one would have proof, so sure his word, or his family's word, would be enough. This was the hidden reveal, the unexpected twist that could unravel everything. His arrogant confidence, his carefully constructed persona, was on the verge of collapsing. Judge Judy's eyebrows raised, a silent, powerful acknowledgement of the bombshell. "Mr. Hayes, were you aware of this evidence?" Arthur Hayes, Brandy's lawyer, looked absolutely stricken. He stammered, "Your Honor, I was not. My client assured me there was no visual record of the incident. He maintained it was a private, unobserved altercation." His voice was tight, betraying a mix of anger and mortification. He had been blindsided, and worse, his client had lied to him, potentially jeopardizing his own reputation. This was a critical moment for the villain, as his own allies began to turn on him, or at least lose faith. Brandy Thorne 3 was now fidgeting wildly, his former bravado completely evaporated. He looked like a cornered animal, eyes darting around the room, desperately seeking an escape. He knew what was on that video. He knew it would expose the full, brutal truth of his actions, stripping away all his denials and mitigating excuses. The humiliation was already beginning, a cold dread seeping into his very bones. "Bailiff," Judge Judy commanded, her voice calm but unwavering, "please connect Ms. Jensen's USB drive to the courtroom monitor. Let's see this minor mishap for ourselves." The bailiff moved quickly, efficiency honed by years of practice. As the monitor flickered to life, displaying the timestamp security footage of Sarah Jensen's meticulously organized, sunlit studio, the silence in the courtroom intensified to an almost unbearable degree. Every pair of eyes was glued to the screen, anticipating the inevitable. This was the moment of public reckoning, the ultimate humiliation for a man who believed himself above scrutiny. The video began, playing silently. Sarah was seen, bent over the exquisite, glowing wood of the lute, her hands moving with delicate precision. The narrator, observing this, would underscore the artistry, the peaceful dedication that was about to be shattered. A few moments later, the studio door burst open. There was Brandy Thorne 3, swaggering in, his face flushed, clearly intoxicated, but undeniably purposeful. He immediately began gesturing wildly, his mouth moving in an angry tirade that the silent footage could only hint at. He pointed at Sarah, then at other pieces of her work, his movements aggressive and dismissive. The tension in the courtroom ratcheted up with every silent second. People leaned forward, straining, their breaths held tight in their chests. Sarah, on screen, was seen trying to reason with him, her gestures placating, defensive. Brandy's face was contorted in a sneer, his finger jabbing at her. He then stumbled towards the workbench, his eyes falling on the magnificent lute. A gasp, almost universally audible, swept through the gallery as they watched him grab the instrument, roughly, carelessly. Sarah lunged forward, trying to intercede, but it was too late. The next few seconds were agonizingly clear. Brandy, with a violent, deliberate motion, lifted the lute, brought it down hard across his knee, and snapped the delicate, ancient wood with an audible crack that seemed to echo even in the silent footage. Splinters flew. The strings shrieked. Sarah recoiled, her face contorted in agony and disbelief. Brandy, his face a mask of drunken triumph and spite, then casually tossed the broken pieces to the floor, where they lay scattered like refuse. He then pointed a threatening finger at Sarah one last time, before turning and storming out, leaving her kneeling amidst the wreckage, her shoulders shaking. The video ended. The monitor went black. The silence that followed was absolute, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was a stunned, horrified silence, mixed with a seething anger. There was no denying it, no explaining it away. The footage was irrefutable. Brandy Thorne 3 had not merely lost his temper, he had committed an act of pure, malicious vandalism, fueled by an astonishing sense of entitlement and petty spite. The public humiliation was total. His lawyer, Arthur Hayes, had buried his face in his hands, his professional career likely crumbling before his eyes. Brandy Thorne 3 himself was a wreck. His face was ashen, his body slumped. He avoided eye contact with anyone, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if willing himself to disappear. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated shame and panic. He knew, with devastating certainty, that his family would see this. The media would feast on this. His untouchable status had just been publicly, irrevocably shattered. Judge Judy slowly leaned back in her chair, her eyes, now cold and hard as diamonds, fixed on the crumpled figure of Brandy Thorne 3. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was a low, dangerous growl, filled with a righteous indignation that vibrated through the entire room. "Mr. Thorne," she said, each word a slow, deliberate hammer blow. "That, sir, was not a minor mishap. That was not an accident. That was the deliberate, malicious act of a spoiled, petulant child who believes his daddy's money gives him license to destroy anything and anyone that stands in his way. You confused wealth with character. You confused influence with morality. You confused privilege with permission. Brandy mumbled something inaudible, his head still bowed. "Look at me, Mr. Thorne," Judge Judy commanded, her voice cutting through his pathetic resistance. "Look at me and explain to this court, to Ms. Jensen, to the millions of people watching this, what exactly you hope to gain by destroying an innocent woman's artwork and livelihood simply because she wouldn't bend to your immediate, self-important demands." Brandy slowly lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot, no longer meeting her gaze, but staring wildly into the middle distance. I was angry. She insulted me. She said my money couldn't buy talent. She said I was shallow." He blurted out, a desperate, childish attempt to shift blame, to paint himself as the victim of a perceived slight. His voice was hoarse, his carefully constructed facade utterly shattered. The audience groaned in disgust.
He still didn't get it.
He was angry because he didn't get his way. "She insulted you?" Judge Judy's voice dripped with scorn. "She spoke a truth you couldn't handle. And your response was to destroy her work? To retaliate with a tantrum worthy of a 2-year-old? Do you behave like this every time someone challenges your fragile ego, Mr. Thorne? Do you go around smashing things when you don't get your way, knowing your family will always clean up your mess?" Her questions were relentless, dissecting his character, exposing his deep-seated flaws for all to see. Brandy's lawyer, Arthur Hayes, finally managed to stammer, "Your Honor, I must object. This is beyond the scope of the current case. It's a personal attack on my client's character." He was desperate, trying to salvage what little dignity remained. "Objection overruled, Mr. Hayes." Judge Judy snapped, her eyes blazing. When a defendant demonstrates such a profound lack of respect for property, for law, and for basic human decency, his character is absolutely central to this case. Your client's actions are a direct reflection of his character, or lack thereof. Her voice, though still controlled, carried an undeniable force. She wasn't just ruling, she was delivering a moral judgment, a public condemnation. Brandy, seizing on his lawyer's brief intervention, tried to regain a sliver of his old arrogance, a pathetic attempt at a comeback. He looked at Sarah, a defiant, almost threatening glint in his eyes. "And what about her? She thinks she's so special? She's just some struggling artist, probably never made that much money in her life. She just wants to cash in on the Thorne name. This is a shakedown." His voice was gaining back some of its venom, fueled by desperation and a desperate need to feel powerful again. He was falling back on his usual tactics, discredit the victim, accuse them of greed. The gallery erupted in angry shouts. "Shakedown! How dare he?" The bailiff had to step forward, sternly calling for order. Sarah recoiled, her face pale, the insult cutting deep. This was the villain fighting back, lashing out with the only weapons he knew: money and intimidation. Judge Judy waited for the shouts to die down, her expression chillingly calm. She let the raw, ugly contempt from Brandy Thorne hang in the air, allowing everyone to fully absorb its venom. Then, she looked at him, a silent, deadly promise in her eyes. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice dropping to an almost terrifying whisper, "you've just sealed your fate. You think this is a shakedown? You think Ms. Jensen, who pours her heart and soul into every piece, is trying to cash in? Let me tell you something about cashing in." She paused, letting the words hang, building agonizing suspense. Brandy, for all his bluster, was visibly trembling. He knew, deep down, that he had pushed her too far. He had unleashed the full, untamed fury of Judge Judy. "Bailiff," Judge Judy continued, her voice gaining strength, "do we have the financial statements I requested from Thorne Industries? The ones detailing Mr. Brandon Thorne III's personal expenses and corporate credit card usage for the past 2 years." This was the judge's counterattack, a strategic strike at his deepest vulnerability, His financial indulgence, the very thing he used as his shield. Arthur Hayes, Brandy's lawyer, practically leaped out of his seat. Your Honor, those are confidential corporate records. They are entirely irrelevant to this property damage claim. This is an invasion of privacy. His voice was high-pitched, desperate. He knew exactly what this meant. This wasn't about the loot anymore. It was about exposing Brandy's entire frivolous, wasteful lifestyle. Irrelevant. Judge Judy scoffed, a look of utter disdain on her face. Mr. Hayes, your client just accused Ms. Jensen of a shakedown, implying she is greedy and attempting to profit unduly. He just stated that her claim for $72,000 is insane, more than his monthly allowance. I think it's highly relevant to establish precisely what constitutes insane and what constitutes a monthly allowance for Mr. Thorne. Let's see just how much this self-proclaimed paragon of frugality values money, especially when it's his money. Her logic was unassailable, her intent clear. She was turning his own weapon against him. The bailiff, without a word, handed Judge Judy a thick binder. She opened it, her eyes scanning the pages with ruthless efficiency. The courtroom was utterly silent, every eye fixed on her. Brandy Thorne III looked like he was about to vomit. His face was green, his eyes wide with terror. He knew what was in those pages. He knew his casual contempt for money, his extravagant spending, was about to be laid bare for the world to see. This was the public humiliation he truly feared, the exposure of his gilded cage, the reality of his utter lack of self-sufficiency. Yes, Judge Judy murmured, her voice laced with chilling irony. Here we have it. Let's see. In the last 2 years, Mr. Brandon Thorne III, you spent approximately $800,000 on private jet charters for weekend trips to exotic locations. Another $500,000 on luxury vehicles, including a custom-built sports car that you apparently totaled within 3 months of purchase. A minor mishap, perhaps? She glanced pointedly at Brandy, a cruel flicker in her eyes. A new wave of gasps and shocked murmurs swept through the gallery. 800,000 on jets. 500,000 on cars, one totaled? The sheer scale of his profligacy was staggering, especially compared to Sarah's $72,000 claim for her destroyed livelihood. The class conflict had never been more starkly illuminated. Judge Judy continued, her voice building in momentum, each revelation a fresh stab at Brandy's rapidly disintegrating ego. Let's move on. $200,000 on designer clothes and accessories. Another $150,000 on exclusive nightclub tabs and premium bottle service. And, perhaps most tellingly, a cool $85,000 on a single, weekend-long bachelor party in Vegas, which, according to these records, included renting an entire floor of a luxury casino and hiring a private concert for your friends. She snapped the binder shut with a resounding thud. The courtroom was in an uproar. The sheer, audacious waste was almost unbelievable. $85,000 for a bachelor party. Someone whispered loudly, their voice incredulous. People were shaking their heads, their faces a mixture of disgust and envy. The social proof for the viewer was overwhelming. This man was not just arrogant. He was an economic black hole, utterly devoid of perspective or responsibility. So, Mr. Thorne, Judge Judy said, her voice now a powerful, resonant roar that filled every corner of the room, you stand before this court, having spent over $1.5 million in 2 years on personal indulgence, on fleeting pleasures, on what you clearly consider disposable expenses. And you have the audacity, the unmitigated gall, to call Ms. Jensen's $72,000 claim for a destroyed work of art, for 6 months of her life's blood, for a family heirloom, a shakedown and insane? Do you understand how utterly grotesque that sounds, Mr. Thorne? Do you understand the sheer hypocrisy of your position? Brandy Thorne III was a shell of his former self. He was pale, sweating profusely, his expensive suit now seeming to hang loosely on his shaking frame. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, only a pathetic, gurgling sound. His eyes darted from Judge Judy to the gallery, then back to his lawyer, who looked utterly defeated, beyond consolation. The weight of his public humiliation, of his exposed extravagance and moral bankruptcy, was crushing him. He was no longer the untouchable heir. He was a laughingstock, a pathetic display of unchecked privilege. This was the ego collapse, raw and brutal. You called her talent trinkets, Judge Judy continued, her voice unrelenting, and then you offered a pittance for the fragments of a masterpiece you so carelessly destroyed. You saw art, you saw history, you saw a dedicated professional. And all you perceived was an obstacle to your immediate gratification. Your money has not bought you wisdom, Mr. Thorne. It has bought you a gilded cage of ignorance and a false sense of superiority. And it certainly will not buy you justice in this courtroom. The silence returned, but this time it was a satisfying, cathartic silence for the gallery. They had witnessed the systematic dismantling of an arrogant bully, the unmasking of a privileged fraud. Justice, they felt, was not just being served, it was being devoured. Ms. Jensen. Judge Judy turned to Sarah, her voice softening, her gaze filled with respect. You brought your truth. You brought your evidence. And you faced down a bully who thought he could buy his way out of anything. This court commends your courage and your integrity. Sarah, tears welling in her eyes, simply nodded, a small, grateful smile gracing her lips. The validation, the respect, meant more than any monetary judgment. Judge Judy then turned back to Brandy Thorne III, her expression returning to cold steel. Mr. Thorne, you are hereby ordered to pay Ms. Sarah Jensen the full amount of $72,000 for the intentional destruction of her property, plus an additional $25,000 in punitive damages for your malicious behavior and contemptible attempts to intimidate and diminish the plaintiff. A collective cheer, quickly suppressed by the bailiff, erupted from the gallery. Punitive damages. This was not just about making Sarah whole. It was about punishing Brandy for his arrogance, for his maliciousness, for his contempt. The moral victory was absolute. Furthermore, Judge Judy continued, her voice delivering the final, crushing blows. I will be sending a full transcript of these proceedings, along with the video evidence, to the Board of Directors of Thorne Industries. I believe they will find the behavior of their future CEO to be illuminating. And I will also be recommending that your attorney, Mr. Hayes, review his client's ethical responsibilities and perhaps reconsider his professional association with individuals who so flagrantly disregard the truth. Arthur Hayes, already defeated, simply slumped further in his seat. His career was on the line, thanks to his client's lies and arrogance. Brandy Thorne III himself, however, could only stare straight ahead, his jaw slack, his eyes vacant. The mention of his family, of the board, of the very foundation of his identity, had finally broken him. He wasn't just losing money, he was losing face, losing status, losing his family's trust, and potentially his inheritance and future. The public humiliation was complete, undeniable, and utterly devastating. His entire world, built on a shaky foundation of inherited privilege and self-importance, had just collapsed. Case closed, Judge Judy declared, slamming her gavel with a decisive crack that seemed to echo the sound of the lute being broken, but this time it was the sound of justice being delivered. As the courtroom began to stir, a palpable sense of triumph and vindication filled the air. Sarah Jensen, still a little shaky, felt a quiet strength wash over her. She had won. Not just the money, but her dignity, her right to respect, her belief in justice. Brandy Thorne III, on the other hand, was slowly being escorted out by the bailiff, a broken, humiliated figure, his face a mask of utter despair. He tried to pull away, to regain some semblance of control, but it was useless. He was just a man now, stripped bare of his power and privilege, utterly exposed to the cameras, to the world, to the scathing judgment of millions. The viral ending was undeniable. His downfall would be played and replayed, a permanent stain on the Thorne legacy, a living testament to the fact that even the most powerful, the most arrogant, can be brought to their knees by the cold, precise hand of justice. He thought money could solve everything. He had just learned that some lessons, the most brutal ones, come at a price far beyond currency. And the world was watching him pay every single penny of it.